Right, hello everyone. I'm excited to now present to you guys our next guest speaker. That is Emma Melton from cair-Chicago, and she is going to give her informational session on Know Your Rights.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Melton. I'm a staff attorney at cair-Chicago. You've heard a little bit from ACLU about what to do when the police interact with you without you wanting to interact with them. But now we're going to talk a little bit about the reverse side. What happens when you're looking for support from law enforcement because you're the victim of a crime, or you need some other kind of law enforcement support, and how you can better navigate these processes, especially if you feel like you're being either discriminated against or not getting the services that you require. So the first thing to note, we are in Chicago, and Chicago has one of the largest budgets for law enforcement in the nation, but we also have one of the lowest murder solve rates. So it's kind of twofold. And one of the theories about why this is something called over-policing and under-policing. We've heard a lot from ACLU about how a lot of the interactions with law enforcement are started with traffic stops. That's the over-policing aspect of it. There's a lot of cops on patrol, especially in underserved communities. They're specifically targeting those communities, which we now know from hard data from CPD itself. But then we're also experiencing when we need the police for help, when we're the victims of the crime, that we're not finding any support from them, they're not investigating, or they don't have the resources to disperse detectives or investigators into the communities to do that kind of investigation. Some of the reasons for these, can be quotas. Law enforcement does still subscribe to some sort of a quota system, and a lot of times they're just going to say that they don't have the resources or they don't believe a crime has occurred. So if you are the victim of a crime, even though we're talking about what to do if the police aren't helping, the first thing you do need to do, though, is report it to the police. That is the resource that we have available as citizens of the United States. The law enforcement is the body that you report crimes to, and so even if you believe that they're not going to take your crime seriously, or you've had negative experiences in the past with that law enforcement agency, you still need to report it to that agency. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. So the very first thing you need to do is contact law enforcement and get a report number. I've heard various stories about whether or not these report numbers are easily given. You may have to ask for it. It may not be automatically given to you. I always tell my community members, please ask for that report number, write it down, save it in your phone. It's going to be the key to a lot of things going forward. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to get the contact information of the law enforcement officers as best you can. At that initial report stage, it's probably not going to be a lot of contact information. They may just give you the general precinct phone number, or the receptionist number, or the patrol cop that's manning the desk. Whatever information they're willing to give you, take it. If you do get to meet with a detective or another officer that's taking an official report from you, get their contact information too. That includes badge numbers, email addresses, and phone numbers. You want to make sure you have various ways to contact them in the event that you need assistance from them in the future. The third thing you want to do is ask if there's any services available to victims of crimes. In Chicago, we have a victim services unit. In Cook County, we have a victim services unit, and you want to make sure you get the contact information for those individuals as well. They're usually separate from law enforcement, so if you need assistance with certain things, you can ask them for help as well. Okay, so now you've made your report, you're waiting for the law enforcement officer to give you a call and update you on what they've done. You're not getting a call, you're not getting an email. What do you do? The first step is to try to reach out to them yourself. I know it can be intimidating to call upon law enforcement, to cold call into the departments, especially if you don't have a direct contact. But the first thing you want to do is try your best to get in touch with someone at the precinct. So you're going to give them the report number, that very important report number that we talked about. You're going to give them your full name. You're going to give them your phone number or email address, whatever your best way of contact is. You're going to try to leave a message if they won't let you talk to who you want to talk to. If you do get to talk to someone and they say something like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't investigate this because of X, Y, and Z reasons. So these are the main reasons that I've heard from individuals about why law enforcement says they can't investigate the crimes. They'll say there's no evidence. That can range from various different things. It can say they can't find a witness, they can't find the perpetrator, they, don't have videos because the videos were deleted, whatever the reason is. For lack of evidence, lack of resources, which we talked a little bit about before. They just don't have enough manpower to go and do additional investigatory things. This usually comes up when you're asking them to look for things online or call hospitals to get hospital records. A lot of times they'll cite lack of resources and either ask you to carry that burden of doing that investigation, or they'll just say it's impossible for us to get. Third, this is a little bit tricky. I've had individuals who have reported crimes and then law enforcement has used either previous illegal activity or illegal activity that may have happened in conjunction with the crime against the individual and say, well, you were doing this, which isn't allowed, so we're not going to investigate the crime that you were the victim of, especially in the sense of eavesdropping. So when you're recording individuals without their permission in Illinois, a lot of times cops will use that against you if you try to present that as a piece of evidence. So that's just something to keep in mind, but this is not about that. So the final reason is they just don't believe you for whatever reason. Credibility, that could be a discrimination aspect. There's various reasons why cops just don't believe what you're saying. Okay, so in these situations, whether they're saying they're not going to investigate or they just won't call you back or they won't answer you, there's a few things that you can do as a first step. So you're going to go up the ladder, you're going to try to find their supervisor. Quick Google search will usually find you that supervisor's name. In the suburban counties, it's a little bit trickier, but it is really important that you try your best to look for someone a little bit higher up than whoever you've been speaking to at the forefront. There's usually at least a supervisor, and if not, the chief of police. In Chicago, we have COPA, which ACLU talked about. That's a civilian oversight board, which is completely independent from the police department. Unfortunately, many suburban counties don't have that, so that's only really an option if you live in Chicago or somewhere else that does have one of these civilian oversight committees. And finally, ombudsman. Again, many suburban police departments do not have these, so you're going to be looking really towards that supervisor or chief of police. Okay, so you've talked to the supervisor, they're not helpful. One of the issues with talking to a supervisor or the chief of police, for example, within a police department is they're essentially investigating themselves, right? So we can see that there's some bias with that. I've had, for the most part, very little success in that area when folks are reporting within the same police department that's investigating them. And so we recognize that that's not going to be a perfect option for most people. We still recommend that you take that route just so that you can say that you've checked all of these boxes in case you need to file something like a lawsuit or something more serious in the future. So if the supervisors don't help you, you can always contact the Professional Standards Division of the Police Department, the Attorney General's office, and at this time we usually recommend that you contact an attorney. Obviously, cair-chicago is here to help you if you ever experience anything like this. We always have attorneys that are available to talk you through what you should do in these situations, but you can also contact any other trusted attorneys that you may know. Throughout all of these steps, it's really important that you document everything, right? Keep a log of everyone that you've spoken to. Write down their names, as much information about them as you can. If you have their badge number, that's great. If you talk to someone on the phone, write down the phone number that they called you from, their name. Make sure you ask them what their position is, right? Whether they're an officer, a lieutenant, whatever their title may be. You want to keep a record of all of that, times, dates, everything about the phone call that you can remember. Just write it down. Try to do it either simultaneously or right after you hang up. The next thing is something that I like to do personally, and this may be the lawyer in me, but anytime I talk to someone on the phone about something that has next steps, or I need someone to do something for me afterwards, I like to memorialize it in an email. The reason for that is when you're talking to someone on the phone, it's very easy for them to say, I didn't say that, you didn't say that, we didn't say that. If it's in an email and they confirm receipt, then there's no debating in the future whether or not this was said or that was said. It's much easier in the future if you're going to go for a lawsuit or any other more serious complaints that you have kind of this record of that. So I call that the follow-up stage, and then finally you're going to want to save everything. Even if it seems like it's something silly like an automatic response, I always tell people just put everything in a folder in your email, keep everything there. You can also, memorialize all your handwritten notes, scan them in. If you get any letters in the mail or they'll sometimes hand you like a victim report after you make the report. Scan that in, just keep everything together so that you have a very detailed account of everything that you've done so far. And then finally, you've talked to attorneys, you've made complaints within the police department. These are some community organizations that do help victims. Some of them are specific to domestic violence victims, but a lot of them are just survivors of general crime in Chicago, and they do provide services. They may be able to advocate for you with specific police departments, depending on where you were the victim of a crime, and they may be able to provide you with just more information and support. A lot of times you may be dealing with the aftermath of being the victim of a crime. You may need social services, support services. These organizations are some, but not all, the places that you can look if you need that. So I know that this wasn't a perfect answer to many of your questions about what to do if you're the victim, and there is no perfect answer. There's not a specific way that you can go about reporting these types of offenses at this time, and especially if you're outside of the city of Chicago. It's really difficult, and we know that a lot of people are struggling with this now, and so we do really hope that many of you will contact cair-chicago to discuss these situations with us so that we can figure out some of the root causes of what's going on and see if there's any way that we can help. But there's just 3 key takeaways that I want you all to think when you're dealing with these kinds of situations. Be persistent, keep calling, keep emailing, follow up. If you forget about the case, I guarantee you they will forget about the case too. Keep a record. We talked about it. Put everything in a folder, keep everything together. Make sure you just have everything readily available in case you need to seek support, which is the 3rd one. Contact attorneys, contact social services agencies, contact loved ones, find your support system in this difficult time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We're doing questions and answers.
Thank you, everyone, and also thank you to everyone who is joining our live right now. I will now open up the discussion for any questions that you may have for cair-chicago or ACLU, and also in the live, if you have any questions or any concerns, you may comment them in the comment section, and I'll go ahead and read them for you guys to get answers. But I'll leave it out to anyone who would like to ask any questions. Yes.
So my question is, in many of those cases where unfortunately a life was taken at a quote-unquote, regular traffic stop that escalated into something that shouldn't have, And a lot of times, certain commenters will say, well, this person should not have resisted arrest, or they could have done something differently to stay alive. My question is, when it gets to a point, and I'm admittedly fasting, or fast forwarding a little bit, if something happens and you're in a physical situation and there's violence, is there something you can do to preserve your life? Because the instinct is to resist. And if you do nothing, sometimes we've seen that also result in death. Is that a point of no return, or is there some advice that can be given as to how to best deal with a situation where you're being apprehended violently, or where there's pressure on your body and your life? I know it's a difficult question.
It is a difficult question.
Sure.
Thank you for that question. It's a very difficult question about a tragic topic that unfortunately is far too common in this country, that people are...
You might need to repeat the question.
Sure, yeah. To repeat the question is, tell me if I'm getting it correct, but if someone is in a situation with police officers that turns physical, the natural response for a human who's trying to protect themselves and stay safe may be to resist or to push back, to resist being aggressed against by others. So the question is, in those kinds of situations, what is the best advice or the best practice to stay safe and to preserve life? Is that a good, okay. So it's a very important question. And as I was saying, far too often in this country, people, especially people of color, LGBTQ people, religious minorities, people with disabilities, and other groups that are subject to discrimination in this society, far too often are victims of police brutality or violence, even when they are not doing anything wrong, even when they're doing everything right. So the question is how to preserve life. I do think that what I said at the very beginning of the presentation does ring true in this situation, that to the best of one's ability to slow things down as much as possible. Some police officers may be trying to escalate a situation. Maybe they just woke up that day and they are going to be having extremely aggressive interactions with people. I think the best thing you can do in that situation is to try to just slow things down and verbalize, I'm not resisting, I'm not moving, I'm going to stop moving, I'm going to stop moving, please also stop moving, stop hitting me. I think that's the best thing you can do. I also think that to the extent that any of us ever witness someone else being aggressed against by police officers, or anyone else for that matter, bystanders can be tremendously powerful in these situations, whether it's recording. If you're in a public place and police officers are doing police activity, you have the right to record them on your phone and to tell them you're recording them, as long as you're not interfering with their work. So if you step back a little bit from what's happening and you record them, that can be a strong deterrent to police brutality. But there have been many situations where if bystanders together say to police officers, stop what you're doing, this is wrong, you're hurting this person, that can, in some situations, make a tremendous difference. I hope that's a partial answer to your question. I don't know if there is ever a truly satisfactory answer to that harsh reality.
We have a question from the live stream, if you could answer. The question is, do you have to answer the door if law enforcement knocks and announces themselves? I assume this would be at a home or...
Yeah, the question was, do you have to answer the door if law enforcement knocks and announces itself? The general rule is that law enforcement may not enter your home or search your home without a warrant. Now, they may enter your home if you invite them in. So this kind of goes back to consent earlier, which is that you never have to invite law enforcement into your home. And again, recall something I said earlier, law enforcement officers in some situations are allowed to lie to you or misconstrue the truth. And so as a general rule, it's best to preserve your rights and to state very clearly to an officer, I won't be opening up the door. We can talk through the door, I'm not going to open up the door. Do you have a warrant? If you do have a warrant that is signed by a judge, please, slide it under the door so that I can take a look at it. I don't know, is there anything else that anyone else wants to add in answer to that question? Okay.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for what I can tell my community members that have non-speaking episodes or who are non-verbal when they interact with the police? They can't always vocalize what they are dealing with, whether it's because they're unable to speak prominently, or they require sign language, or they are, they're on the autism spectrum and or otherwise neurodivergent and having a non-speaking episode due to fear or panic. What would be a way for them to assert themselves that they are indeed complying and that they are, to allow them to leave the situation safely?
The question was for people who are nonverbal, either generally or in certain situations for any reason, and may not be able to articulate that to a police officer during a police encounter, what is a best practice to do in that situation in order to stay safe? We did say earlier that, if you have a disability or anything else that prevents you from communicating with an officer or complying with what the officer is telling you to do, you should try to the best of your ability to communicate that need to officers, and they are required to comply and provide some kind of accommodation if it's reasonable to do so. I think for folks who may be nonverbal permanently or in certain situations, to the extent that they're aware of that, and they're aware that they may come into contact with law enforcement at a time when it may just suddenly happen, to the extent they can carry something in their wallet or on their person, that a little card that explains their situation, that could be really helpful. But we also have to be advocating with our police departments that they do better in their training and their policies. They need to be training officers to be prepared for situations like this. And unfortunately, we see a lot of situations where officers are like, hey, why aren't you responding to me? And they take a perfectly fine and normal situation and make it worse. So at the same time as we can be helping our community members create little cards or something like that they could present to officers, we should also be advocating to our officers that they be more prepared for situations like that.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, just a quick one. So say for example, a person's reached out to local law enforcement to file a report for what they perceive or what is essentially a violation of civil rights. Still haven't heard anything back. Also went as far as to reach out to the supervisor of that department and spoke with them, but still haven't gotten a call back from an investigating detective. What can an organization like ACLU or Council on American Islamic Relations do to help somebody in that situation, where they're not receiving any type of feedback from law enforcement whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, what do you do if, what can an organization like cair-chicago or ACLU do if you're the victim of a crime, you're not getting any response, or on the alternative, you're the victim of a civil rights violation during maybe a pretextual stop of some kind, and how can we help? One of the main things that we do at both organizations is we file litigation, which means that you go to court and you can sue the police department and the officers involved directly for some sort of compensation
Or not taking action?
Yes. Yes. So you could potentially, so there's two different questions here. So one is if they don't take action, and one is if you're the victim of a civil rights violation. So I'm going to talk about both. So first, it's if you're the victim of a civil rights violation, you can file. We have very strict civil rights laws in the United States, and if they violate those,
For instance, Atticus gave an example of if they search your car, even though you say you don't consent. Exactly. So that would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and you can sue them for that. On the other hand, if they fail to act, right, one of the duties of a law enforcement officer is that they have a duty to protect and serve, right? That's their main motto. So if they fail to do their job, that can also be actionable. There are things that we can do as an organization that we may be able to either ask for injunctive relief if it's a practice that we see as a pattern. So one department specifically is just repeatedly not helping folks when they're the victims of crimes. We may be able to pull that together as a pattern and show that their policies are not functioning and that they need to change. And that's one of the main ways that we change. We also, of course, always recommend, community support, getting together with folks that are similarly minded, that have been similarly affected, can be really powerful. Speaking out against these injustices when you experience them or you see them happening to someone else, we stand together and we fight for change as a group. It's not always a legal avenue that's successful. There's always an availability to put public pressure on them just as a community member without being a lawyer.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you have any final questions at all?
I'll get closer so that you don't have to repeat the question. So I don't know if I missed this, but normally in situations like this, in a routine traffic stop, we hear things like make sure your hands are visible as the cop approaches you so they don't think you're reaching out. Because some people try to reach out for their wallet and you have these trigger-happy cops and things escalate, or they want to pull, they want to take off their seatbelts and they get comfy. I think it's better to just do nothing until they're well within view and then they give you instructions. So did I miss that? And if I didn't miss it, is it no longer applicable? Is it something we no longer advise? Can you just comment on that?
Thank you. It's a great question. No, I think you're absolutely right, and we didn't cover that in the presentation. Yeah, when you see the flashing lights in your rearview mirror, the best practice is to, as quickly as possible, but also safely, pull over to a safe location. A lot of people are under the impression when they get pulled over that this little spot right here isn't great, I don't want to pull over right here, I'm going to keep going for a little bit and look for a better spot. That can send the wrong message to police officers who may interpret that as, not complying. So it is best to pull over as soon as possible, provided you can do it safely. And then yes, to put your hands either on the wheel. Some people like to put their hands sort of up against the window like this, showing that they're open and not moving, so that the police officer sees them as the police officer walks up. But yeah, these are best practices to just sort of, slow things down, remain calm, breathe, and not make any kind of sudden movements. Like me personally, if I got pulled over, I would be inclined to, before they even come to the windows, just start pulling out, my registration, insurance, and stuff like that. Right. But of course, the police may interpret that as like, instead of pulling something out of the glove compartment, as putting something into the glove compartment. So yes, thank you for asking the question. Try to just keep your hands steady, keep your body steady, and just wait for any further instructions from the officer. And if you're ever confused by an instruction or you don't understand it, again, slowing things down, asking for clarification, being courteous, but also firm where necessary.
Do you have any advice for if you get pulled over by an unmarked police car? A person thinks about going to a gas station or calling some number to verify that you're actually being pulled over.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the question is, what if you try to get pulled over by an undercover law enforcement vehicle, right? So that means that you see lights, you can't tell if it's a police officer or not. This is becoming a little bit more of an issue now. And for various reasons, it can be a really difficult situation. I know, especially as a woman, if you're driving at night and you're being pulled over by an unmarked car, that can be very dysregulating and just a difficult experience. My advice would be you can call 911. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you call 911, you can give them your approximate location. You can ask them is there a law enforcement vehicle in this area? I'm being pulled over. Is this legit or not? And 911 should be able to tell you whether or not it's a legitimate vehicle. If they say it's not, in the unlikely event that it is not a real law enforcement vehicle, then yes, we do recommend that you travel somewhere, usually directly to a police station if possible, somewhere where you know that there's going to be people around, a lot of people around that can provide you with safety and support during this time. We are now realizing that it's really easy for folks to get lights and sirens online and put them in their cars. All you really have to do is have like a black car and some sirens, and you could easily fake people out into thinking that you're a police officer. So this is an ongoing scam that we are aware of, and just to keep yourself safe, it's always best to double check, especially if you're alone in your vehicle. And thank you for that question.
If it is a police officer, then everything else goes on as if it were a formal police car?
Yes, yes. So if you get verification from 911 that yes, that's a law enforcement vehicle, you're being pulled over, then everything that Atticus discussed previously is still in play here. So, you know, you would just go about it as a regular traffic stop and continue with your asserting your rights that way.
Okay. If we don't have any other questions, I will conclude our event for today. I appreciate everyone who has come out to help to support us, and also we also encourage everyone who is here and also watching to spread the information that you've learned with us today with your neighbors, your friends, your family. This is all very important information that could very well save someone's life. So again, I appreciate everyone who has come to support us, who has joined us, and we look forward to interacting with you guys soon. Thank you so much.